Hey, everybody, and welcome back to the show. I am your host, as always, Ben Thomas. One of the things that I love most about technology is that it really impacts people across all sorts of different walks of life, different verticals, different use cases and applications. And one of the places that it really leaves its mark is in the world of residential technology. And if you've been to shows like CEDIA, you've seen not only a lot of great technology from an AI standpoint, a lot of great smart home technology, but you've seen that market of luxury residential change and evolve. So I wanted to stick a pin in that conversation today and ask somebody who knows a lot more about that world than I do, about that world, how it's evolved, and how manufacturers, service providers, and integrators, installers are evolving with that world. So to have that conversation, I brought my guest on today, Tayloe Stansbury, Chairman and CEO of Kaleidescape. Tayloe, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Thanks, really appreciate it.
Well, I'll tell you what, we'll start with kind of the first question, Tayloe, and it's probably a pretty easy one. But, how would you kind of define that luxury residential market? And what are some of the ways that market has changed, especially in the last 3 to 5 years?
Yeah, so all kinds of things are going into that market, luxury residential, and I'd say it's changing a lot. It used to be that people would put in dedicated home theaters, and then the rest of the house would be pretty generic. But over time, what's happening, I think, is that you're seeing that room being exploded out, and people want to use that room for more purposes than just watching movies. So it's turning into a multi-purpose entertainment family kind of room. And then you start seeing those some of the things that were in that room before appearing elsewhere all over the house. So I think that it is evolving past the sort of bespoke, dedicated home theater room to something that's a lot more multi-purpose and better use of the space within the house.
Yeah, and Tayloe, I love that you start kind of with that home theater conversation, right? Because for a lot of folks, that really is the point of entry, right? Whether you're talking about a large display, projector, surround sound, whatever. For a lot of folks, especially in the world of luxury residential, that point of entry is that home theater market. Expanding from there, obviously, whole home automation, control, all sorts of different things like that. But I want to ask, right? The world of residential changes, it feels like every single day, especially from a buying and selling perspective. You've seen a lot of the trends from DIY and e-commerce sort of leak their way up almost into luxury residential. But how has that buying process and that buying channel evolved, especially in the luxury residential market? Because historically, it was almost exclusively through the integrator. Now it's evolving a little bit. Talk to me about it.
It used to be, again, that home theaters were dedicated and that you had to have somebody design that for you. But now I think that when people are thinking about how you use your entire house and how you have gathering spaces that can be used for more than one thing, can be used for movies, for gaming, for conversations, for eating, and have all of that be sort of all mixed together throughout the home. What that means is that the equipment to do lighting and shading has moved out into the rest of the home and not just in the home theater. And screens are becoming less expensive and bigger and really much more gorgeous, and they're spreading throughout the home. Speakers to go with them, people want them to be less obtrusive. So something that is in wall, and you're seeing a lot more of those products that are turning out to become quite good. It used to be that in-wall speakers were, so. So I'd say that the entertainment spaces have spread sort of more throughout the home. And it also, in answer to your question about how much of this is DIY versus integrator, there certainly is much more DIY work in this area going on and experimentation, but those systems are complicated at the same time. And a lot of times it is easier for most people to have an integrator. One of the things that's kind of interesting is that it used to be, if you were designing a home theater, an architect might lay out a shell for you to go put that in, and then you bring in your AV integrator to go deal with the innards of that room and how to make it sound and look great. But now, as that's getting exploded throughout the rest of the home, then the architect actually has to start grappling with, how do I embed electronics throughout the rest of the home? How do I design these spaces so they actually sound good and work when you have a screen on? There's not too much light flooding the room when you don't want it to be. And so the integration between an AV integrator and an architect sometimes lags, where the architect will design the space and then an integrator will be brought in after the point when the homeowner has used up too much of their budget, and then maybe the space doesn't really quite lend itself to doing the things that they wanted quite as well, because those two disciplines are not trained together and don't typically work together as much as they should.
Well, and it's a challenge really that you see across all sorts of different residential installations. It's not unique specifically to luxury residential, but you see the same thing a lot where you have HVAC technicians selling smart thermostats, which people want to integrate with their Alexa devices and their control systems. So you sort of have this siloed installation channel, and obviously we all want to say, hey, AV integrator, could you come in and do all my duct work and make sure that all of my shades and things are working? But do you see sort of that sort of the all-in-one integrator emerging a little bit more, or do you still see sort of those practice specific integrators, or maybe a little bit of both?
Most of the integrators with whom we work, Kaleidescape, they are having to become a jack of all trades, where they can do lighting and shading and air conditioning, light remodeling to allow for making changes where they have to. So they have to become pretty good at doing all those things. But far better if at the very beginning of the project they could work with the architect from end to end to make sure that all the audio and visual systems are tied together, that there's some kind of integration system like Josh.ai that would integrate all those systems together with a single instruction set that's easy to manage and that the homeowner actually can fix, rather than every time something breaks, they have to call the installer back in.
Well, Tayloe, I'm curious too, and we'll dig into a little bit more to Kaleidescape and some of the vision that you guys have. But I'm curious, when you think about obviously the installation side of things, I almost always recommend going with the integrator and things like that. But historically, the integrator was the sort of the gatekeeper into the world of products, right? You had to buy your products through an integrator or a dealer, or whoever. Now you see sort of this e-commerce channel wanting to grab their own piece of the pie a little bit. How do you find that balance as a manufacturer and a service provider? Do you see kind of that demand from e-commerce and direct to consumer evolving and being something that people want to demand more? Or do you say, hey, on the luxury residential side, it actually is still primarily through that dealer channel?
I began with my whole interest in AV as a scrounger, and I would go read about things, find something that I thought was going to be awesome, find it on sale somewhere, buy it, put it all together myself, and put together my first system that way by scrounging high-end parts from various different oddball sources. And eventually I ended up, on the recommendation of a colleague at a former job, getting an integrator in. And one of the first things he said to me is, you've got to get a Kaleidescape. And I'm like, what? What's wrong with my Apple TV? And it's like, no, dude, you got to try it. So I bought the cheapest one I could, which wasn't very cheap. And I installed it. And then my wife and I just fell in love with it. And it ended up metastasizing across the house and across other houses. And I ended up buying the company. So that's the sort of how I got into it. So I do think that there is some mix that is good between integrator and heavy involvement of the homeowner. One of the things that can be tricky is specifying systems that are balanced. And especially if you're trying to do it all yourself, then sometimes you'll go nuts on some aspect of the system and then have some other part of the system be undermatched to that. And so you now spend more money than you should have to get a so-so result because you've got some pieces of your system that are undermatched. And so having a skilled integrator who can help you make sure that your system is well matched, all the pieces of it are at the same level as each other, and it makes sense, is important. And it's harder to do that as a homeowner, but it's better to talk to an integrator if you're well informed and can ask good questions. Some of them might be off base, but at least then you have a really good dialogue with the integrator and can make sure intelligent choices are being made end to end.
Case in point, video distribution being one of those main questions, right? You talk about resolution, you talk about bit rates and bandwidth being one of those conversations you absolutely have to have, because the last thing that you want is you to buy a Kaleidescape system and then you're just plugging in, don't shoot me for saying this, but just an HDMI cable and hoping everything works, right? That at the end of the day, look, you can probably get a signal to a TV, but there typically is a level of intentionality in the video distribution and networking system that really helps amplify a lot of those technologies. Would you agree?
Yes, I would say all kinds of balance issues that come up in systems that are not particularly well designed. So the biggest, sin that we see is somebody puts in a really gorgeous display and a pretty good sound system, and then they feed it with a streamer, and that is their only source device. Whereas Kaleidescape can offer full lossless audio, full reference video, something that is much, much closer to the director's intent, and make sure that that really gorgeous screen that you bought that didn't actually cost that much is really showing off what it can do. And it just comes off a little bit murky or dull if you're trying to feed it all the time with a streamer. We also see problems where somebody's trying to do what you mentioned, video distribution, and they'll take a low bandwidth video distribution system to distribute video through the house. So you get this gorgeous source, you compress it down, you decompress it on the TV end, and now you got a garbage output, right? So you want to make sure that all parts of the system are well thought out and balanced with each other, so you get the best output for the amount of money that you spent on whatever AV system you had in mind.
Well, I'll tell you one of the things, Tayloe, that I love about Kaleidescape. I am a fan on my own, which is initially why I reached out for this conversation, is that, Kaleidescape of even five-ish years ago, you talked about sort of that directorial reference video. It's obviously still a very massive and important market for you. But you guys have done such a good job at becoming approachable for a lot of different folks right across the buying channel. I would say typically mostly through that luxury residential side of things, but you've embraced a lot of technologies and video distribution and servers and all sorts of different things to kind of be a lot of different things to different people and mean that in a good way, right? Giving people access to that level of quality that historically was, hey, you have to have an entire server system set up in your house if you want any sort of reference video. How, from a brand standpoint, has that informed not only your product development process, but your go-to-market to reach a lot of those different communities across the residential world?
Yeah, that's a great question. And one of the things we thought about is how do you help a user start small and then grow into something larger over time? So when you've just put in your first really nice TV and maybe a decent sound bar to go with it, maybe a subwoofer, then you want to have a source device that doesn't cost $1 gazillion to feed it, but that also will do much, much better than a streamer. So we recently introduced a new product called Strato V, which is a Kaleidescape player with full access to the Kaleidescape library of high fidelity films, some, over 10,000 films, and including concerts and TV series that are high quality and so forth. And then what you want to be able to do is have a relatively inexpensive device that can access it. And this device, Strato V, is able to operate standalone at about the same cost as the nice TV you just put in. So it makes sense. And then if you want it to grow from there and you want to spread it to other TVs in your house, or you want to store more video locally so you don't have to wait for it to download and so forth, you can buy servers and you can buy other players and you hook it together into a very large system with up to half a petabyte of storage and as many players as you'd like.
Well, what's interesting about that is as you sort of allow a different part of the market to come in, a lot of what I we'll call exclusive, luxury residential brands kind of, they like to box out people that aren't the upper echelon. They like to make things inaccessible. That's sort of their MO. How have you found success by kind of retaining some of that luxury side of things, but also becoming a little bit more accessible? I mean, is it something that you've seen value in, especially from not only a brand awareness standpoint, but from a product development and sales standpoint?
Well, I'll go back to my own story where I started small with Kaleidescape and then grew to a larger system, and then I ended up getting involved with the company. So I do think that making the product accessible to that entry user to go with the beginning system that they just bought is super important, and then being able to grow up with them as their love for the area and the product expands. So we've tried to architect in all of our recent products this way so that there is an entry point that you can get into, and then you can scale up from there as you become more interested in the product.
Tayloe, I want to ask, because I guarantee you there are people just on their computers or on their phones listening right now saying, hey, how do I start, right? I've got these grand ideas. I've got an incredible 4K projector. I've got this wonderful TV. I need something like this that's going to give me that high resolution, but they don't always know how to start that conversation. How would you recommend people reaching out? Is it directly to you? Is it through an integrator? How would you recommend that people kind of start that conversation?
Well, certainly you can read up it on our website, kaleidescape.com. You can look at our movie store, so store.kaleidescape.com, to get a flavor for all the content that we have. We have all the product specs up there. The product you want to start with is Strato V. That's actually our flagship player and our entry product all in one. And then you can expand and build on that. It's sort of the entry building block. But it is our very best player with Dolby Vision, full reference video, and lossless audio. And it decodes lossless audio, so you can plug it straight into a 2-channel DAC. You don't even need to have a processor, and so forth. So it's a perfect entry product is also our flagship player. Now, that conversation can also be had through your dealer. Ultimately, you'll have to buy it through your dealer. We only sell through dealers. Some of those dealers do sell online, and we have references to those on our site. But ultimately, the conversation would have to be with your dealer. But it's always good to go in educated.
I would agree with that. And like I said, I'm a massive fan typically of integrators because they're going to be a great point of contact from a support standpoint, but also make sure your system's built properly. Now, I want to ask Tayloe, I've seen, obviously seen a lot of the great stuff Kaleidescape's doing, and I've had the chance in person several different times to get to see, some of those high resolution, videos that you guys are playing through the server. But, naturally my mind says, well, hey, what's next, right? That's always where I'm thinking is what's next. So if you had the crystal ball and said, hey, in the next 3 to 5 to 10 years, here's what you might see from Kaleidescape, what would that be?
Well, that's a great question, but I can't really answer it because we don't really talk about future product. What we will say is that we're listening very, very carefully to what it is that customers are asking us for, and we will respond to that insofar as it makes sense for us to do so within our strategy.
Look, I like that answer. That's a tease enough. Stay tuned with what Kaleidescape is doing because I'll tell you, like I said, I am a fan of what you guys are doing. That's why I reached out, and I think the ability and the content and the resolution that you guys are bringing to that residential world is really, it's impactful, right? It gives people access that they historically may not have had. And I think it's something that not only is admirable, but something that's really going to be beneficial, especially as we expand like you mentioned, some of those home theater systems. Tayloe, I'll tell you what, I really appreciate you coming on the show, and I appreciate you having conversations and finding your way into the industry because you didn't always start in the AV industry, but we're thrilled to have you.
Thank you very much. Thanks very much. It's been a pleasure. And I will say that, for Kaleidescape, our roadmap for the future is very full. We've got a lot of ideas, both on the software side and the hardware side. So stay tuned.
Well, fantastic. That's a fantastic tease going into some of the great things happening at Kaleidescape. I'll tell you what, Tayloe, we appreciate you coming on, but we also appreciate you guys tuning in and watching. Be sure to like, subscribe. Check us out next time on Pro AV Today, and we'll see you soon.